Okay. Continuing. That would have been part 1 for chapter 28. And there's not much left. I think I got about 2 pages out of God's book that he dictated to me as he dictated the Torah to Moses. And what the rabbis don't know today or any day before this in Judaism, sages or theologians of the Hebrew Bible, he also dictated, at his command and direction, all of the prophets of the book of the prophets, there's about 20, were commanded and directed to write their respective books. And any one of them could have also been told to, commanded to do the books of the writings. You know, you have the Torah, the book of the prophets, and the writings in the Tanakh. Okay, well, there's something else. Well, there's a whole lot of more information discussion on part 1. And I'm not going to go back through all of it. I'm going to pick up where I was cut off. My memory card shuts down at 30 minutes. I can put 10, 12, 14, 30-minute videos on it at one time, but for some reason it stops at 30 minutes. So this is part 2, chapter 28 of the book God titled, had me type, Isaiah 53 and the day of the Lord. This is the day of the Lord. And Isaiah 53 describes his representation. God's righteous servant Moshiach, as the sages believed in the Talmud, for the most part, and rabbis. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think Rashi's part of the Talmud. He's the first man to be believed to have thought that Isaiah 53 describes all of the Jewish people as one man, Israel. That's chapter 21, by the way. In 23, it's Toby, a singer, who says the same thing. And 24 is Jews for Judaism. It's not all, it's just one verse, 53:10 for Toby. Jews for Judaism, I think, is 4, 5, 7, and 10. Anyway, they're not near as long as 21 and 22. 22 is geared primarily to show how Jesus doesn't fit any of the first 11 verses. And the only verse he fits is verse 12, where it says he was counted a sinner. Because he was. We have a top 10. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's in this book. It's got to be in here somewhere. Top 10 lies of Jesus from his lips. 5 of which were false prophecies. And that makes him a liar. He's not unblemished. You know, their whole concept is the unblemished Lamb of God. Let's go to Leviticus where, you know, you offer up an unblemished lamb and you get sin forgiveness. Well, actually, Leviticus says for unintentional sins, they don't seem to abide by that much. None of them are forgiven. There's not a Gentile who's not carrying his own sins with him right now. I don't care if you worship Jesus every day. I don't care if you're in the Vatican. I don't care if you're the Pope. You're not forgiven of anything. And the only way they're going to see heaven is to convert to Judaism. It's the only way. It's a Jewish heaven for the Jewish people. After what they've been through, they deserve it. The world has hated them from the get-go, once they became the chosen. But they're still here. God's favorite saying, suffering makes you stronger. That's part of what the fire of refinement's about. Wait a minute, that's not where I was. Hold on just a second. Okay, by offering himself for the guilt of the Jewish people, God's righteous servant which is basically an offer to go through the fire of refinement, become the righteous servant, and remove the guilt of the many made righteous. Get them to be righteous and they won't feel guilty about not following God's laws. He controls my hands. He's bothering me right now. God of Israel. He's a lot more personal than you can possibly get from the Torah, first 5 books. But he's just angry. It's, it's plague, famine, raising up armies. I don't want your animals anymore. Exile. But no, he's a person who's, he can represent the worst of humanity when he's really putting me through the grinder, and the best of humanity. He is that the best you want? Usually, when he's not really punishing, maltreating, wounding, all those other things, which is kind of rare in my opinion. He's so much fun to be around, and it feels so good to have him here. He's within me, and he fills this room at the same time. If I'm sitting in a room giving a speech, if I'm standing giving a speech to people in that room, his presence is going to be in there, along with the presence of the angel of his presence. Will surround everybody in there, head to toe. The difference with me, they flow through me. They doesn't just surround me, goes through me. I'm literally part of the Shekinah. God's presence, along with the angel of his presence, is what the Shekinah is. And that's what enters the temple. You know how we're going to know God's in his temple? I'm going to walk through the doors. Because he's with me. Those who believe that he's with me, and particularly those I had to convince, there is a reason you have to build this temple on Mount Zion. Forget about the Temple Mount. He doesn't even want it. Said it's too small, tainted with Islam, controlled by Jordan. We know there's too many obstacles there. But you can find a place on Mount Zion for it. And he'd like it to be in Jerusalem, but I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work out. It has to be done. And I don't know why the rabbis of the Jewish people don't teach it. He said his last words to the prophets before he stopped speaking to them, Malachi 3. Basically, he says, when I come, if my messenger hasn't cleared the way for me, which means getting the temple built for him, because that's what he's doing. That's his purpose of Isaiah 53, that might prosper. He's returning to his temple. He says, I will bring utter destruction to the land of Israel. Build a temple, covenant of friendship, and Jeremiah, never defeat and dispersed again. Don't build a temple, utter destruction to the land. And it's not by God and his power. No, it's just by his creation. This is God's definition of himself. Absolute power, absolute knowledge, and I am my creation. So when he says he's going to do it, he means his creation is. And I would have figured that's like Iran, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, all attacking at the same moment. Israel does have the most powerful army in the Middle East. But 4-1, utter destruction. I don't know why. I know your rabbis teach this Messianic era and heaven on earth, basically, and world exaltation, the world speaking Hebrew, which are all false teachings and fallacies. And, basically making the Jewish people forget about the words, never again, never forget. Because why would you want to, be careful about whatever's going on because of what happened at the Holocaust and before, if the world's going to love you? They're just, what they're doing? They're just preaching, teaching what they know their flock wants to hear so that the donations will be bigger and better. Then telling them, well, when Moshiach comes, we're all going to be reckoned with in this mess. Because the flock's not going to want to give a lot of money to people who make God angry. Oh, and he is angry, and there's nobody that comes close to Tovia Singer and Jews for Judaism. Mainly because of how many followers they're deceiving with this, and how it's hindered God. We can't get a word in edgewise out there with the Jewish people, for the most part. Because the minute you say Isaiah 53 is something other than Israel, that's it. That's not what Tobiah says. That's not what Jews for Judaism says. It can't even be a Jew. It's got to be a Gentile. And God did that purposely because he knew what the Gentiles were going to do. He knew they were going to have their unblemished lamb, some man, human sacrifice. May not have had the names, but he knew what they were going to do. 53 is partly written for that purpose. He knew. Well, anyway, that's in another. I don't want to get into all that. Let me finish this up. Just as Ezekiel was bitter and his spirit in fury, while he was in the hand of God, and the Spirit had stepped into him, the Spirit of God alights upon the descendant of King David in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, who is God's righteous servant. He will also be bitter, that's me, I have been, and angry, and my spirit in fury, in the hand of God. It's the fire refinement. The Spirit that steps into Ezekiel and the Spirit of God that alights upon God's righteous servant is the Holy Spirit, who is the angel of God's presence. And he is a person. Judaism doesn't recognize that. I don't know why. I mean, he speaks in the Hebrew Bible to Ezekiel. The Spirit of God went to Ezekiel and said, Ezekiel, speak. Well, he's not a person. How did that happen? Isaiah 63, he can be grieved. In the Exodus, he's the angel that went before the Israelites. God said, obey him. If you don't obey him, he will not forgive you. For I am in him. God's in his spirit, which is an angel. That's in the Torah. Nobody knows that. Apparently. I've never heard it. Ezekiel is going through the same fire refinement. This is the last paragraph. In the hand of God, that God's righteous servant goes through, though he was not asked to offer himself for guilt. And he didn't make a covenant with God as I did. I'll go through your fire refinement if you give me long life. Because I fulfill Isaiah 53:10. God chose to crush him with disease, that he would offer himself for guilt and might receive long life and see his children. Covenant is, you give me long life, I'll go through your fire refinement, become the righteous servant, and remove the guilt of the witnesses by making them the many. They're the many. First 6 verses in quotes. Righteous. And I got a good head start because I got a covenant that forgives all their sins. So they're going to have a clean slate. And I just need to keep them righteous. I need to get them back to synagogue and in the Hebrew Bible. And Ezekiel wasn't crushed with disease. The purpose of God in crushing his righteous servant with disease is done primarily to prevent the Gentiles, and I guess we should add Tovia Singer, from using the animal worship and atonement laws for a man. Tovia Singer uses it for 6 million of the murdered and slaughtered of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. The man's given long life. That's what it's all about. To make the many righteous with his knowledge. To be God's representation in the day of the Lord. Which they don't seem to know about either. Well, they don't do. If they do, God hadn't had me go look at it. I should think they have something. You cannot offer blemished animals, and these laws were never intended for human sacrifice, for humans. It's the animal sacrificial and atonement worship laws. So anyway, so God crushes me with stage 4 lung cancer. He did crush my life. As I said, the fulfillment of 53:10. And they told me, the doctors, this was after surviving colon cancer, with an 8-inch tumor in my colon that had burst through. I was on my deathbed when we finally got to a doctor who could tell me what was going on with the colonoscopy. And they cut it out. And I had to take colon chemo for 6 or so months. But then afterwards, they wanted to run more tests and discovered the lung cancer. And they showed me the pictures. White spots all over my lungs. And they said it's untreatable. I've never had a doctor tell me that. And I said, what do you mean it's untreatable? And they said, look, you're going to die in about a month. There's nothing that can be done. And that was when the planes hit New York 22 years ago, and I haven't seen a doctor since. Except for recently. God had me go in for a checkup. I wasn't sick or anything. Primarily to get x-rays of my lungs. Guess what? No spots. And cancer doesn't go away. Cancer grows. Clean as a whistle. I never really felt the lung cancer. And God says that He basically afflicted me with it. And then the doctors found it, took the x-rays, and then He removed it right away. I went on to become a triathlete after that. I was in my 40s, 43 to 45, I think, running half Ironman distances. No one with stage 4 lung cancer can do such a thing. Next chapter 29, trying to get through 30 today. 29, God's purpose which might prosper. I agree.